The room held 2,000 people. Every one of them believed Elvis Presley was looking at them. That was part of the magic, part of the specific, unrepeatable electricity of watching Elvis perform in the showroom of the Las Vegas Hilton in the early 1970s. He had a way of casting his attention across a crowd that made each person in it feel individually chosen. It was a gift. It was also, in the way of all genuine gifts, something he had no full control over. But there was a difference, noticed by the people who watched him from the side of the stage night after night through hundreds of performances across those years, between Elvis performing the gesture of connection and Elvis actually making it. And on the nights when something real crossed the distance between the stage and a particular face in that crowd, the band knew, the way you know when you have watched a man work long enough, when the professional mask has slipped and what is underneath has stepped forward to handle the moment itself. Those were the nights they talked about afterward. The ones they still talk about. James Burton had been Elvis's lead guitarist since 1969. Before Elvis, he had never played behind a performer who watched the audience the way Elvis watched the audience. Not scanned, watched. The way a man watches when he is genuinely looking for something. When the crowd is not, to him, a mass of anonymous devotion, but a room full of specific human beings, each carrying their own particular weight into the building. Burton described it with the precision that comes from having witnessed something often enough to understand it structurally. He said Elvis could locate a person in a room of thousands, in low stage lighting, across a distance that should have made individual faces indistinguishable from the general shape of the crowd. Elvis could find someone and hold them with a completeness that was difficult to explain and impossible to imitate. He didn't do it consciously. It wasn't technique. It wasn't stagecraft. It was something older and less controllable than either of those things, the same quality, in the plainest language, that had made him Elvis Presley in the first place. The night in question, and there were many such nights, which is perhaps the most important thing to understand. This was not an isolated incident, but a recurring truth about the man. Began as they all began. The house lights went down. The TCB lightning bolt lit up behind the stage. The band hit the opening notes. That bombastic, perfectly calibrated piece of theater that Colonel Tom Parker understood instinctively. Because whatever Parker's many failures, he understood that Elvis required an entrance that matched the mythology. The room erupted, 2,000 people rising in the darkness. And then the moment the spotlights found him, a wave of noise that bypassed the ears and landed somewhere deeper. The response to Elvis Presley walking onto a stage was not simply enthusiasm. It was recognition, relief, the collective exhale of people who had been waiting, without fully knowing how long or for what, and had just found it. He moved through the opening numbers with the surety of a man who knows exactly what he is doing and has long since made peace with how large it is. The band locked in behind him, the tempo controlled, the room in his hands, and then, somewhere in the arc of the second set, in the particular geography of a concert where the initial frenzy has settled and something more genuine has become possible, Elvis saw a face. She was in the third or fourth row, not near the stage's edge, not in the premium seats directly below the lights. She was in the middle of the crowd, surrounded on all sides by other people, standing when everyone else was standing, visible only as one face among 1,000. She was weeping, not performatively, not the tears that people cry at concerts because the music and the darkness and the shared emotion of a crowd create a space where feeling can finally surface without judgment. These were different. Something specific was happening in that woman that had nothing to do with the performance. Elvis saw it in the middle of a lyric. The people watching from the wings described what happened next as a kind of slowing. Not in the music. The band continued. The tempo held. But something in Elvis shifted register. The broad, commanding sweep of his attention, the quality that made 2,000 people feel simultaneously seen, narrowed. focused, became singular. He did not stop the song, but he began to move toward her side of the room in the unhurried way that Elvis moved on stage when he was not moving for show. He sang to her, not with the calculated aim of a performer choosing a target for the gesture of personal attention, but with the specific directness of a man who has seen something real and cannot simply keep moving past it. He held the note. He let the lyric land in her direction, and when the chorus came around again, he was close enough to the edge of the stage that she looked up. Their eyes met. She wept harder. What happened in the next moment is the thing that the people who saw it never quite managed to explain to people who weren't there. Elvis knelt. He went down on one knee at the edge of the stage. Not quickly, not with drama, not performing the gesture, but simply doing it. The way a person does something they have decided is necessary. His face was no longer above her by the full height of the stage. The distance between them collapsed to something that a person could actually cross with their attention. He reached down. She reached up. He took her hand in both of his. The music continued. The crowd, many of whom had not noticed the specificity of what was happening, continued to respond to the performance. But the people close enough to see, the fans in the rows around her, the musicians at the far end of the stage, the security staff who had developed a particular attentiveness to these moments because they were not rare but were always intense, went quiet inside themselves. He held her hand. He said something to her. The microphone was no longer at his mouth. Whatever he said only to her. She nodded. Still weeping, he stayed. On one knee at the edge of that stage, in the middle of a Las Vegas showroom performance, for long enough that it stopped being a moment and became a choice, a deliberate, sustained, completely unscheduled act of presence from a man who could have risen at any point and simply continued, and chose not to. Then Elvis did something that the people nearest the stage would carry with them for the rest of their lives. He reached to his own neck. The TCB lightning bolt hung there on its chain. The necklace he wore as a declaration of identity. The private emblem he shared with the people closest to him. He held it in his hand for a moment, then he placed it in hers, closed her fingers around it. He stood. He turned back to the room. The band was already moving into the next number. Kathy Westmoreland had been Elvis's soprano since 1970. She sang directly behind him, close enough to hear the breath between phrases, to understand, with the intimacy of making music alongside someone for years, what was happening in him moment to moment. She said later that these incidents were not exceptional, that they happened in various forms, with a regularity that placed them in the category of Elvis's essential nature rather than his exceptional behavior. Night after night, in some form or another, it happened. She also said something that has stayed with the people who heard her. She said it looked like need. Not in an ugly sense, not in a way that diminished the giving, but Elvis connecting with a suffering stranger in a crowd, an anonymous person whose specific grief he had no reason to notice and no instruction to address, satisfied something in him that the performance itself, for all its power, could not reach. She had a theory about it, formed over years of close observation. Elvis understood, in some pre-verbal, instinctive way, that the crowd's love was addressed to something other than him, to the king, to the mythology, to the feeling people had carried into the building from years before, offered back to the figure on stage as if he were both the original cause and the current recipient. The love of the crowd was real. It was also not precisely for him, but the woman weeping in the third row, in the private crisis of her own life, carrying something into that building that had nothing to do with mythology. That was a person, specific, suffering, real, and Elvis could always find those. He came off stage between sets in a particular state that the people around him had learned to recognize. Not the electric energy of a man who has just completed a performance he is proud of. Not the restless deflation of a bad night. Something quieter, more interior. The state of a man who has briefly been the thing he actually was, beneath the jumpsuits and the mythology and the Colonel's carefully maintained design, and who has just been reminded, by a single unplanned human moment, what that feels like. He asked if anyone knew whether she was all right, the woman from the third row, whether someone on the security team had checked on her. The team confirmed she had been attended to, that she was overwhelmed, not unwell, that she had looked down at what was in her hands and said yes, differently, a second time, with a quality in the word that the man who reported it said he couldn't quite describe. Elvis nodded. He sat down. He accepted the towel someone handed him. He was quiet in the way he was quiet when something had happened that he was not going to put words to. Charlie Hodge, his oldest companion in the traveling company, the man who had been beside him since the army and whose real function, beyond handing him water on stage, was simply to be the person in the room who knew him well enough to be honestly present without managing him, sat down beside him. He did not say anything. Sometimes nothing is exactly right. There is a quality to the accounts of these moments that distinguishes them from other Elvis stories. The stories about cars given to strangers, hospital bills paid without announcement, concert tickets sent to people he barely knew, all documented, all consistent, all evidence of the same underlying character, but the stage moments carry a different texture. The off-stage generosity happened in private, in the absence of an audience. It required no performance and no recognition, but when Elvis stopped the spectacle to attend to a single human being in a crowd of thousands, that happened in front of everyone, and yet it was not, by any honest accounting, performed. That is the paradox the people who witnessed it closest have spent years trying to accurately describe. You cannot manufacture the specific quality of attention Elvis brought to those moments. The musicians felt it in the way the room changed pressure when he had located someone and decided to close the distance. The backing singers felt it in the way his voice changed intention, not in pitch or power, but in what it was reaching toward. From the voice of a man giving a concert to the voice of a man speaking to one specific person who needed to be spoken to. The crowd felt it too, in ways they often couldn't articulate. People who were present when one of these moments occurred described, across decades of separate accounts, a particular stillness that descended on the room. Not quiet, because the noise continued, but still in the way a room goes still when something real is happening inside the ordinary. They were watching a man who was, for that moment, not performing at all. Elvis Presley spent the final years of his life under an increasing weight that the people around him managed with varying degrees of honesty and care. He did bad shows where the medication had blurred his concentration, where the voice that came off the stage was a diminished version of what it had been. People who loved him watched from the wings with a grief they could not express. Those shows exist. They are documented. They are part of the truth, but the other truth, sitting beside it, equal in the factual record, is this. Even at the end, he could still find the face in the crowd. It was the first quality he had possessed. It was the last one he lost. Ronnie Tutt, his drummer since 1969, played behind Elvis until the very end. He said, speaking slowly, with the care of a man trying not to damage something in the handling, that he believed those moments were the truest thing about Elvis Presley. Not the voice, though it was extraordinary. Not the stage presence, though it was singular. Those were gifts, but the capacity to find the one person in a room of thousands who was quietly breaking apart, and to stop, without instruction or hesitation, and close the distance. That was character. The original person, the one who existed before the mythology settled over him and made him into something the world believed it owned. It was, Tutt said, the most human thing he had ever seen done on a stage, every night, in some form or another, not because the Colonel designed it or the cameras were positioned for it, because Elvis Presley looked out across a crowd of thousands and could not, constitutionally, look past a person who needed to be seen. We have the records and the statistics of his fame, The sales figures and the chart positions and the photographs that have circled the world so many times, they have become part of the visual grammar of the 20th century. What is harder to hold are the small moments. The woman in the third row, the hand closed around a necklace, the 60 seconds on one knee at the edge of a stage while 2,000 people watched, and only a handful understood precisely what they were seeing. Not the king finding a subject, not the celebrity managing an interaction, one person finding another. That is the smallest and the truest story of Elvis Presley. And it happened, in some form, every single night he stood on a stage. He could not help it. He had never learned how. That was the gift nobody pressed into a gold record. The one that never made the chart positions. The one the Colonel could not package. And the mythology, for all its enormity, was never quite large enough to swallow. A man looking out across a dark room full of people, finding the one who was lost, closing the distance.